My boyfriend uninvited me on a week-long trip because his girl best friend is uncomfortable with me. Now he is freaking out because I am throwing away our relationship. My boyfriend wanted to vacation this summer to his mom's friend's house in Hawaii with me and his two best friends. We had been planning on this all spring, and at some point one friend dropped out of the trip, leaving just the three of us in early June. Once the friend unexpectedly dropped out of the trip, they called my boyfriend and told him that now that it was just the three of us, she didn't feel comfortable with me going on the trip since she didn't know me that well and she didn't want to be a third wheel. She said she wouldn't go on the trip if I were to go. Without telling me that this was happening, they changed the plans and made it a trip just for the two of them, and they changed the location to a beach in Costa Rica. I was trying to figure out when to ask for time off this summer and hadn't heard the news about the plans. So I asked my boyfriend which week in August I should set aside for the Hawaii trip. He let me know that actually he had talked to his friend and that she didn't want to go if I were going, so he was going to go alone with her to Costa Rica. He said we could go another week later, maybe to Mexico City. I was upset and tried to talk with him about how the situation made me feel, especially since this wasn't a case of a separate trip being set up ahead of time. This was a case of me being invited and then uninvited from a week-long tropical vacation with a girlfriend of his who I had never met before. We eventually decided to make a trip together to Copenhagen, which we both wanted to visit. As compensation, I also asked to meet her to feel more comfortable with the trip. We spent the 4th of July going to see her and her boyfriend in the city where they live, and although it was nice to put a face to a name, it was ultimately a very cold trip and she was not at all welcoming to me. My boyfriend remarked on how unfriendly she was to both of us, he thought, and said he was surprised she didn't act warmly to me. I went out of my way to get to know her and her boyfriend, but it didn't click. Even after several days they were somewhat cold to each other as well. They bickered a little about their future in his 3-week trip without her, scheduled for the same time as their trip. This had been my effort to feel better about the trip, so I told my boyfriend that I still didn't feel comfortable with things and was insulted by how it was handled. I had tried to make things smooth between us, and I asked him to please come up with something to help me feel better about the trip. On a visit to his family, they asked about the trip. They were all shocked that he would have arranged it this way. They told me they would have been furious if they were in my position, which triggered a fight in which I asked him to please help come up with a strategy to make me feel better and more secure about them going together without me. He said he would never do this kind of thing again, which feels like not much to offer since this is a once-in-a-lifetime trip. He kind of offered not to go on the trip, but he had already paid for the tickets and made arrangements, and I didn't want to stop their trip and be resented by both him and his best friend. He asked me to give him ideas of how to make me feel better and wanted me just to tell him what to do. Installed. Until it was finally the day of the trip, he bought me a bag of peanut butter cups and I drove them to the airport. I feel so disregarded and disrespected in this situation. I want to break up with him, but don't want to burn up something that has otherwise been really good update. I was really upset the day I dropped him off and he was texting me but I wasn't responding. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to do anything at all in the state I was in. Waited until the next day and then I sent him a thought-out text letting him know that I didn't feel safe or loved and how the trip was handled and that I would be dropping his things off at his place and leaving his keys with the neighbor. He called but left no messages. He then messaged me that he didn't understand. He called and messaged me the rest of the week but I couldn't pick up or text back. On Thursday he realized I was serious and asked me logistical questions.